At 39, Tallulah Bankhead revealed she was caught in a love triangle with a married couple, and it was not good at all. Behind the glitter of champagne parties and Broadway lights, a dangerous game of passion and secrecy played out. For Tallulah, it meant whispers in studio offices, scandal at private dinners, and the risk of losing everything she had worked for. This was not a story of simple gossip. It was a dangerous dance in an era when the wrong rumor could end a career overnight. But how did the boldest woman in Hollywood find herself trapped in such a web of secrets? To understand, we must first return to where her story truly began. Tallulah Bankhead was born in 1,902 inches, Huntsville, Alabama, into a family of privilege and politics. Her father, William Bankhead, would rise to become Speaker of the House, while her mother, Adelaide, died of sepsis just weeks after Tallulah's birth. That loss haunted her childhood, leaving an emptiness that no amount of laughter or applause could ever fill. She was raised largely by relatives in a household where manners were strict, but curiosity was never stifled. The South of her childhood was steeped in tradition: church bells on Sundays, women in lace gloves, and men with polished shoes lingering on porches in the evening heat. Yet even as a girl, Tallulah resisted that order. She had a sharp tongue, an irrepressible laugh, and a hunger for attention that could not be contained within parlors or polite society. When she was a teenager, her father's political career brought the family to Washington, D.C. There, she experienced a world of marble columns, smoke-filled rooms, and the heady glamour of political power. But it was not politics that captured her imagination. It was the flickering light of silent films and the allure of Broadway. She devoured the magazines of the day, marveling at women with bobbed hair and daring clothes who seemed to live without apology. The cultural climate of her youth was changing fast. The Victorian restraints were giving way to jazz clubs, flappers, and the restless energy of the Roaring Twenties. In smoky parlors, music by Bessie Smith and Louis Armstrong spilled from phonographs, while young women cut their skirts shorter and danced the Charleston. Prohibition only fueled the thrill of rebellion. For Tallulah, this wasn't a passing trend, it was a calling. She longed for the stage lights, the scent of grease paint, and the sound of applause rising from the darkened theater. By the time she was old enough to choose her own path, she knew Alabama would never be enough. With a beauty both unconventional and magnetic, and a voice already thick with the whiskey drawl that would later define her, Tallulah set her sights north. Her destination was clear. If she wanted to transform herself into more than a Southern girl with a famous name, she had to conquer Broadway. Tallulah arrived in New York City like a flame thrown into gasoline. The noise, the lights, the endless rush of carriages and motorcars thrilled her. She studied acting, but it was her sheer force of personality that drew attention. In auditions, she wasn't always polished, yet her laugh filled the room, her wit left men blushing, and her dark, piercing eyes promised danger. By the early 1920s, she was making her name on the New York stage. Critics were divided, some dismissing her as too brash, others enchanted by her daring. What no one could deny was that Tallulah commanded attention. She walked into a theater lobby and all eyes turned. She spoke at a party and the conversation shifted. That kind of magnetism could not be taught. Hollywood came calling soon after. She signed a contract and traveled west, expecting the cameras to love her as much as the stage had. Yet she quickly learned the studio system was its own cage. Directors demanded a softer image, producers pressed her to play ingenues, and she found herself fighting with cameramen who said her Southern drawl would never play in silent films. Still, Tallulah persevered. She moved between Broadway and Hollywood, appearing in pictures like Tarnished Lady and The Cheat. She was not yet the household name she dreamed of becoming, but her circle of friends was growing. She mingled with artists, playwrights, and rising stars who admired her nerve. Behind the scenes, she grew notorious for her quick quips. At one dinner, when asked why she never married, she raised her glass and said, "Darling, I'd rather be burned at the stake than bored in bed." By the late 1920s, Tallulah had earned her breakthrough in London theater. Crossing the Atlantic, she stunned British audiences with her fearless style and smoky voice. There she became a star of the West End, dazzling critics and aristocrats alike. Newspapers described her as a tigress in silk, unpredictable and irresistible. When she returned to America in the 1930 seconds, she carried with her the reputation of an international sensation. But fame was never simple. The brighter her star burned, the more she had to craft an image. The studios wanted glamour and mystery. Society wanted charm and refinement. And beneath it all, Tallulah carried a secret life, one that could never be spoken aloud in interviews. Tallulah Bankhead never lived quietly, not on stage, not in love. Behind the gossip columns and sharp one-liners, she was navigating a world of forbidden passion. In an era when studio contracts contained morality clauses and a whisper could destroy a career, Tallulah took risks others only dared to dream about. Biographers and contemporaries have written of her affairs with both men and women, but it was the women who left the deepest mark. She frequented New York and Hollywood parties where coded glances and private corners allowed same-sex couples a moment of honesty. Friends recalled her sweeping into a room, cigarette smoke curling above her head, and settling her eyes on a woman with a look that made intentions clear. One of the most whispered-about chapters in her life was the triangle she formed with a married couple. At 39, she fell deeply into an affair that involved not just one partner, but both husband and wife. In public, they appeared as close friends, attending premieres and charity galas together. In private, the passion was stormy, alternating between rapture and ruin. For Tallulah, love was never timid. She gave herself recklessly, but the secrecy weighed heavily. She also moved within a circle of queer icons who understood the cost of hiding. She shared cocktails with playwrights like Tennessee Williams, who later admitted she inspired the raw sensuality of his characters. She crossed paths with Greta Garbo, with whispers suggesting nights spent together behind hotel doors. There were rumors of flings with Billie Holiday, of entanglements with stage actresses in dressing rooms still warm with grease paint. Each romance carried the thrill of rebellion, but also the constant fear of exposure. Travel offered some freedom. In London, Paris, and Rome, she found more tolerance, slipping away from Hollywood's rigid eye. In European salons, she could laugh loudly, flirt openly, and be embraced by a world less concerned with image. Yet even there, she remained careful. Photographers lurked, and a single headline could cross oceans. Tallulah lived with both joy and terror. She cherished the intimacy of women who saw her not as a star, but as a soul. Yet she also knew the studios were watching. At any moment, a scandal could erupt, contracts could be shredded, and her career could vanish. The tension between desire and danger would only grow stronger as whispers turned into rumors. By the early 1940 seconds, Tallulah's appetite for risk began to collide with Hollywood's hunger for control. The whispers about her love life grew louder. Studio executives, nervous about gossip columns and box office receipts, pressed her to appear at public events with carefully chosen male escorts. Behind the scenes, they warned her to keep her friendships quiet. Tallulah bristled at the pressure. She was never one to bow easily, yet the consequences were real. When rumors surfaced about her triangle with a married couple, doors began to close. Roles she had been promised were suddenly unavailable. Producers claimed the scripts were delayed, but she understood the truth. Her reputation was becoming a liability. The press, hungry for scandal, circled. Gossip magazines printed coy lines about her wild nights and bohemian friends. Some writers hinted at mannish habits, a coded phrase of the era for same-sex attraction. For a star who thrived on public attention, the scrutiny cut deep. She masked her fear with wit, tossing off outrageous jokes in interviews, but inside she felt the sting of isolation. Professionally, the blows multiplied. Once sought after for leading roles, she began receiving fewer offers. Casting directors whispered that her unpredictability and reputation made her too risky. On Broadway, she still commanded an audience, but Hollywood's confidence was shaken. For a woman who had built her identity on being desired and admired, the shift was devastating. Emotionally, the pressure was heavier still. Friends noted her turning increasingly to alcohol and late-night parties as a shield against loneliness. She was surrounded by admirers, yet confessed privately that she felt profoundly alone. Each new rumor threatened not just her career, but the fragile network of trust that allowed her to love in secret. For Tallulah, the crisis was more than professional. It was existential. She had fought her entire life to live without apology. Yet in the glare of the spotlight, even the boldest woman in Hollywood found herself cornered. The laughter grew louder at parties, but behind it, her heart carried a silence she could not shake. Tallulah refused to vanish quietly. Even as Hollywood cooled, she turned her fire back to the stage, where audiences still adored her. Her performance in The Skin of Our Teeth, and later The Little Foxes, proved she remained magnetic. In the theater, she could be raw, unfiltered, and deeply human, far from the studio gloss that once confined her. She also found new life in radio and television. Her smoky drawl, once criticized by silent-era directors, became her signature. On shows like The Big Show, she hosted with biting humor, teasing guests, and making even the stiffest stars laugh. She was unpredictable, sometimes slurring from drink, sometimes brilliant and sharp, but she was never boring. As she aged, the world around her began to shift. By the 1960s, whispers of same-sex love carried less threat than in her youth, though they still bore stigma. Younger actors admired her audacity, her refusal to be tamed. Some saw her as a pioneer, a woman who had lived openly in her own way long before society softened. Personally, she endured illness and decline. Years of drinking and smoking ravaged her body. Her once boisterous parties grew quieter, filled with fewer friends, though the loyal ones never left her side. She spoke often of her regrets, but more often of her defiance. "I was never ashamed," she told one interviewer. "Never ashamed of what I felt or who I loved." Tallulah's later life was a mixture of solitude and legacy. She spent time reflecting on the cost of her choices, but she never denied them. Her laughter, though weaker, still carried the same mischievous spark. She looked at a changing world and knew she had lived on the front lines of a battle for authenticity. When she passed in 1968, at just 66, the news sent ripples through both Broadway and Hollywood. Some remembered the scandal, but most remembered the brilliance, the fearlessness, the woman who never played small. Her life had been one long performance, but also a testament to the hunger for truth. Tallulah Bankhead's life was a storm, wild and unforgettable. She dared to love where others hid. She risked everything for desire, wit, and freedom, even when the world punished her for it. Her story is not simply about scandal, but about the price of being unapologetically alive in a time that demanded silence. When we look back at her now, we see more than a headline or a quip. We see a woman who pushed against boundaries, who carried loneliness in private, but laughter in public, who proved that authenticity comes at a cost, yet leaves a legacy that cannot be erased. Tallulah's journey asks us all a question. How much of ourselves are we willing to hide to be accepted? And what is lost when love is forced into the shadows? If you found yourself moved by her story, share your thoughts below. Do you remember a performance of hers that left an impression? Or a quote that still makes you smile? Subscribe for more hidden stories of Hollywood's past, where courage and heartbreak often walked hand in hand.